Hello YouTubers out there, this is Jerry at the Movies. On this episode I'm going to discuss the films and film critics that have inspired me in regards to film reviewing, film criticism, and being an amateur filmmaker. A film that really changed my life, really in both regards, film criticism and the other. In filmmaking was Taxi Driver, Martin-Scorsese's 1976 controversial film. Quite possibly the best American film I've ever seen. And I had seen a censored version of that on television during the 1980s, but it wasn't really until 1990 when I caught it on, I believe, HBO, and I really saw a film that, in a way, was a morality tale. In another respect, it was a film about loneliness, something that most everyone can identify with. And in this case, the main character, Travis Bickle, played by Robert De Niro, living in New York City. The perfect setting for loneliness, really, if you think about it. Normally, I guess, loneliness is seen as a person who's isolated from the world and living out in the desert or in a trailer in the middle of nowhere. But in this case, he's living in a city full of people, and he doesn't seem to interact with too many of them. But he drives a cab, so there is interaction, but there isn't. And a tale of self-destruction and, to a certain degree, self-immobilization. And that film, just in terms of how it was shot, the angles, the performances, the cathartic nature of the character, particularly the bloodbath at the end of the film, how it ends on a touch of ambiguity. It's just everything that is great about 1970s cinema is in that film. But more importantly, it's a film that, after you see Taxi Driver, you can't help but endlessly talk about it. So that also helped me to think that maybe I would be crazy enough to actually make a movie. And I've made some films shown in public access, so I've never really become known as anybody. But that's okay. It just, the inspiration was there. And a lot of it I used. My first full-length feature film was called Faustus, and was based on Christopher Marlowe's morality play. And a lot of it echoes the things that occur in a lot of scenes from Taxi Driver. So it was very much an inspiration. So Taxi Driver, in more ways than one, was the inspiration for really everything. In fact, it pretty much informed my film going. And my whole collective, shall we say, film knowledge began with that film. Prior to that, I was a fan of Steven Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis, and also a fan of Stanley-Kubrick, but it wasn't really until Taxi Driver that I began to really understand the power of film. You see it in Kubrick, but Taxi Driver just had something that no other film really had. It's hard for me to say what that is, but in terms of the themes of isolation, loneliness, living in a big city, the morality of it. I mean, I lived in New York at the time, so I guess that kind of helped for me to understand it. So Taxi Driver is the film. That's it. And then after that, I just became more and more interested in other films that hadn't paid enough attention to before, or I had seen but I saw them differently, and I began to understand the process, which is a difficult thing to talk about, the process of filmmaking and how you are aware that you're seeing film. Films by design are meant to, they merit a suspension of disbelief. They ask for you to suspend your disbelief. And when I had studied Hitchcock in college, at the tail end of the 1980s, I became aware of camera movement, which prior to that, I knew there was something I had seen in Scorsese's King of Comedy and The Color of Money, that something about them made me want to revisit them over and over again. These were not just pure entertainments. There was something else in them. And later on I realized it was how the story was told that was unique, but also the camera movement. And the way, particularly Color of Money, which kind of led the way, paved the way for Scorsese's Goodfellas, the propulsive nature of segueing from one scene to the next. That's really what did it. And film critics, well, there are many. I think when I started reading film reviews in general in the 1980s, they were from Pauline-Kael and Roger-Ebert. Peter-Travers, who at the time was writing for People magazine before going to Rolling Stone magazine and writing for them, and also David Edelstein. So a lot of these critics, they had a passion about films. You could see it in their writing. Pauline-Kael made you think that you were sitting there with her watching these movies. It's almost like you're watching the film as she's commenting on it. It was really a remarkable talent that she had. Unfortunately, she's not with us any longer. And Roger-Ebert, the thing about him was he saw things in films that most people didn't discuss. Particularly, speaking of Taxi Driver, he understood the loneliness in it, but also how a line of dialogue can say so much, and how he commented on that. In particular, in Taxi Driver, the line everyone knows from that film is, "Are you talking to me?" But the line that follows is the one that's never really quoted as much, which is, "I'm the only one here." So those type of things he made me aware of. And also, what was wonderful about these critics is that you could see the film, and more often than not, I actually, believe it or not, read reviews before I saw the films, which, is a good way to do it, but it's even better when, after you've seen it, to then reread their reviews. And then you can compare and contrast and argue. And more often than not, I didn't agree with Roger-Ebert. Roger-Ebert, for example, was not a big fan of A Clockwork Orange. He gave that a 2-star rating. And I found that in my own years of reviewing films, there are certain films I don't like that a lot of people do. Night of the Hunter being one. I never cared for that picture. I still don't. And there are many others. I can't think of them offhand, but that's one thing. He had courage. He had the courage of his convictions to tell us exactly what it is that he liked or disliked in a film. And more often than not, I think he was being honest. There have been some controversial moves he made. Unforgiven, he panned originally, and then he later re-reviewed it and gave it a 4-star rating. So those things are a little odd, but and within the same year. It's one thing when you look back at a film many years later down the road and you say, thought about that film frequently. What is it about it that I keep thinking about, even though I panned it? And you look at it again and you see things you didn't see before. So they were the ones, Pauline-Kael, Peter-Travers, Roger-Ebert, Danny Peary, who wrote 3 different volumes of cult movies. They are fantastic books. If you can find them, they are excellent books. Very analytical, very introspective, and he gives his opinion and why they are cult films and so on, the films he reviews. So those were the ones that inspired me. So, and in terms of making films, Martin-Scorsese, and reviewing them as well, I think he, because he's just as passionate a critic as the other ones are in terms of really discussing films, even ones he doesn't love. You sense there's something that he likes about them, that he can invoke a certain pleasure or displeasure, but you get something out of it. So Taxi Driver is the one, and and I've been reviewing films since 1984 for student newspapers at first, and then later on I reviewed films for publication out in Setauket, New Jersey, the Village Times. So I've had some reviews published. So I'm not, professionally, not just an amateur online, as I have been since 1998. But there it is. So those were the major inspirations, Scorsese and those critics. And of course Kubrick and Wells, but Scorsese was the first with Taxi Driver. So, I guess that's it for this week. My inspirations, the films that inspired me to even talk about or approach the idea of making a film. Those are the ones. In a couple of weeks, I think, I will talk about my favorite films of all time and why they are my favorites. And next time, or next episode, I'm going to talk about Orson Welles and his unfinished films, and specifically and importantly on The Other Side of the Wind, a film that hopefully someday will see the light of day, but so far nobody knows for sure what's going to happen. And it's one of those lost Welles films. Selective scenes have been seen. It stars John Huston. I mean, it's just an incredible cast. But whether this film will ever come to see the light of day is hard to say, so we'll see. And so that'll be next time. I'll discuss The Other Side of the Wind and Orson Welles' unfinished films. And until then, I'm Jerry the Movies, signing off.